Welcome to Relationship Mastery, a podcast for those who want to learn how to master the art of creating happy, healthy, and loving relationships. Please join me, Adey-Jones, and my co-host, Barry Selby, each Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for a lively and informative conversation on everything to do with relationships. Hello, everyone. Welcome for another week. And hi, Barry.
Hi, Del. Another good topic today.
Yeah, exactly. I'm feeling a little, gotta be chirpy this morning. I was just saying to Barry that I didn't have much sleep last night. We're going to do a show one day about how cats are narcissists and dogs are codependent.
A worthy topic, yes.
Exactly. My narcissistic cat woke me up in the middle of the night, and so yes. So anyway, but today's topic, we're going to talk about obsessive relationships. And the reason why I was just telling Barry that I really wanted to talk about this is because I watched a show called Baby Reindeer, and I found it absolutely riveting on many levels.
Right.
And I don't know, Barry, have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't. I did hear some of the reviews and also some of the not news reports, but it's kind of like the stories about the story sort of thing. So I've been hearing about those things. So I got the worldview, so to speak, and the overview of the story, but didn't actually watch the actual show itself.
Well, the reason, there's a lot of, I was saying before, there's a lot of controversy about, the identity of the woman who plays who is the stalker in the story, because this is apparently based on his real life experience.
Hmm.
And whether it's true or not, I didn't actually pay much attention when I watched it to the fact it was a true story. I just found it interesting on so many levels, simply just because I love psychology and everything like that. But the reason why I found it so interesting was twofold, and one is a different show. It's about how authentic I found him, and I think we should do another show on that another time. But for this show, we want to talk about obsessive relationships and what it is that has some of us, or many of us, or maybe you don't identify with it, but that we can become obsessive about another person. And um and I think it's firmly rooted in the belief that we are in some way lacking, that we don't have everything within us, and so therefore we think that another person is going to provide something for us. That's why we sort of worship them or put them on pedestals, or become obsessed about them or things like that, is because they represent something that we don't see in ourselves, which is
Hmm.
that, as we know, not true. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today, and start off by asking Barry what's his experience as far as obsessive relationships are concerned.
Well, just to add one piece to what you said first before I jump into my own experiences, that really what we're talking about here is another level of codependency in a sense, even though it doesn't necessarily feel that way, because sometimes the obsessive person seems to be in control, and the person being obsessed about feels like the victim sort of thing. There can be that paradigm happening as well. My own experiences have been a couple of times I can remember. There's more than one, more than two, I'm sure, but two that definitely come to mind, where they're both women, and they seemed to find me so fascinating. They wanted to be with me, and I had no desire attraction on my part at all. And to be honest, I'm not sure my skills have developed much since then, but I didn't have any skills to deter them without feeling like I'm going to either make them upset and did, or become more obsessive, you know. And so that was the thing that I found was very challenging, is how to deal with that energy coming at me.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
wasn't nice to be on the receiving end, but also it's like I didn't want to change my behavior to not let that happen, sort of thing, because there's a part of me in my mind going, well, if I didn't act this way, they wouldn't do that sort of thing. That mindset. Somehow I become responsible, which is a whole over responsibility issue.
hmm,
So there's more we can unpack. I'm just going to say there's a couple of things to play with in the conversation.
yeah, exactly. And it's interesting. So what's occurring to me is when you said that it looks like the person that is obsessing or has this obsession about another person is actually sort of appears to be in control, because that's not the way I see it at all. I see it as they are so completely out of control. They've lost all sense of healthy boundaries, of respect, of even sometimes the law, breaking the law.
Mhm.
They're so out of control. They've so sank into that belief that they can't live without the other person, and
Right.
often they are even editing, selectively editing what they believe the other person is saying. They're misreading signals, they're ignoring, as you just said, you were very, very clear with them, with these women in your past, that you were not interested, you were not attracted to them, but they still somehow ignored that healthy boundary you were setting up and
Hmm.
still coming towards you.
Well, I just want to let me reframe the controlling piece,
Yeah.
because that is absolutely true. The feeling of control, meaning that they could push my buttons more easily. That's that sort of control. So not so much about that they were in control of everything happening, but
Yeah.
they had the instigation. I felt like I was reacting to what they were doing versus now I know better how to respond and be more self ownership. It's just the fact that sometimes people who are, celebrities or whatever, being the attacked person by some stalker,
Hmm.
they're going to basically sometimes feel like a victim because they can't get out of the way of this person who keeps attacking them. So they feel a victim to that person's control energy.
Yeah.
That sort of, you know.
Yes, exactly. And it's interesting you brought up celebrity, because you do, I sort of, we too tend to hear about stalkers when it comes to celebrities, that these
Mhm.
people that absolutely do not know them at all. All they've ever seen
Right.
is the character they play on TV or whatever it is, and they build up this fantasy of believing that they actually know the person, and that's an extreme form of obsessive
Yeah.
stalking. But just even within sort of regular everyday life, we can have people that build a fantasy about us. And I think I was sharing with you once before, Barry, that as a coach, sometimes that's why I think it's really important that we sort of bear all and are very real about who we are and our warts and all and our foibles and our own
Hmm.
struggles, because often as a coach or a teacher or a guide, people can perceive and put us on pedestals and think that we have all the answers and we figured everything out. And no, we haven't. We're just muddling through life like the rest of everybody else. But
Right.
sometimes, I've noticed in my life, I mean, I've had a couple of obsessive relationships, boyfriends and things, but I would say the real obsessive one for me was a couple of clients that saw me in a certain way, and I had to put up some, as you said, I had to behave in a way that wasn't natural to me. My natural state is to be loving and kind and giving, and that's why I do what I do. It's why you do what you do. That's our nature. But when we
Right.
do have a client, say, that has become fixated on us, or has sort of put us in a certain category that's not true, or put us on a pedestal or whatever, that can also be really scary. I think I was sharing with you that I had an experience once where I had a client, and I thought that was sort of, some things I could see were a little bit off, very off, I should say. But then she decided to sort of show up at my house very late at night once. And thankfully, I do live in a gated community. And they did call me to tell me that she was here to give me a gift. And
Hmm.
I had said, whatever you do, do not let her in. They were like, whoops, she's already in. And I basically hid in my house with the lights off, because she had been to my home for some coaching. So she knew where I lived. And that was the end of it. I don't do coaching from my home anymore. That was enough to make me realize that, not everybody is healthy. And some people misconstrue signs of care and compassion as they're meaning more to the relationship. And so I don't know if you ever found that in your work.
Well, I've always had my client calls either done over Zoom or out some public outside place away from my home.
Okay.
Um, that was just, it wasn't even thinking about whether I should or not. I just simply did that. So I'm grateful I didn't have that um, invitation out there without realizing it, sort of thing. So I'm grateful for that. So I appreciate how you feel on that one. For me, definitely having healthy boundaries out of my work has been something I've been navigating, working with all the time about where do where do I allow people through, where I don't, how I set things up to be very clean. Because, as I said, having had the experiences earlier where had those two women in particular who were basically being predatory, like seeking me, and I wasn't reciprocating. I wasn't desiring to reciprocate. I guess I've always had that sense of be prepared sort of thing, rather than letting it happen, because that's the other challenge is that in our devotion to spirit and lovely what we do, sometimes it can be a sense of innocence where we don't plan for the worst sort of thing. We aim for the best, which is nice. I mean, it's a great thing to have a positive attitude, of course. And at the same time, it's important to have healthy boundaries, self-respect and self-appreciation to take care of ourselves, and have an intuition and a gut instinct around other people so we can sense, because generally speaking, those sort of people tend to leak out that intention without even consciously doing it. So if we really are tuned in ourselves, we can be sensitive enough to notice that person's got some issues that we might want to steer clear of or do something to redirect, so we don't take that on as a challenge that becomes obsessive.
Mm-hmm. No, I know, and I hear what you're saying, and I want to go back a little bit because, as
Mm-hmm.
I was saying to you before, I know that when I was younger, I definitely I can identify with some of the feelings of handing over your power to another person, thinking that they have something that you don't have. For sure, I
Yeah.
had that. But what I also had was I grew up in an environment where it wasn't. My mother was wonderful in many ways, but definitely narcissistic, and I was raised to believe that my feelings weren't important. It was always about putting other people's needs ahead of my own. So I sort of, those things that you talk about, those red flags were, I don't know, my sensor wasn't even turned on to recognize red flags because my wiring was such that you don't have a self, you don't put yourself first, so therefore you don't have a self, so there's no need to be paying attention to red flags because you're not going to do anything about it anyway. So that was very much there for me. But also, when you do grow up in an environment where you haven't had your self-esteem built up in a healthy way and that you do think that you're lacking or there's something wrong with you, it's so easy to see other people and this sort of admiration for qualities they have, to see that as if I'm in partnership with them, therefore I will get some of what they have, rather than knowing that is, we call it positive, projection, rather than knowing that if I can see that in you, that must mean somewhere deep inside me I have the same qualities. There's a saying, I think it was Debbie Ford said it. It's like an Eskimo, or sorry, I'm using the wrong word now. It's not politically correct to say Eskimo. Well, I'm sorry about that. It would be like if you are a remote village somewhere where they'd never had any exposure to Western sort of ways of life. They wouldn't miss a hamburger because they'd never had a hamburger.
Mm-hmm.
Now here, in the Western world, we know what a hamburger is, so we can miss it. And it's the same thing. They say if you see a quality in another person, you wouldn't even recognize it in the other person if you hadn't seen it in yourself or felt it in yourself at some point.
Got it.
You can't
Yeah.
miss something that you've never been exposed to or never heard about or know what it is what I'm rambling on here. But that's what I'm trying to say is if you see a strength in another person that you feel is missing in you, you're just recognizing something that you've buried deep in you. And that's
Mhm.
where instead of taking that obsession outside of yourself, take it and go, okay, where in me is that quality? If I see their strength, where's my strength? If I see their creativity, where's my creativity? Just always take it back to you and do that deep inner work of exploring that within yourself rather than just think it's the other person has it and you're the one that is missing it.
Yeah, that's a game changer for some people to recognize that what they see has to be within them anyway. It's like it's so true that if you don't have it, you can't sort of experience it or see in other people. So it's that resonance, and because we talk about projection work most of the time about negative projections, like we judge somebody else because we're just not willing to judge ourselves, and you can do the healing work and everything else. But the positive side of that has its own place where basically we put on a positive projection on somebody else that they're so amazing, they're so wonderful, and we downplay ourselves because of that, which is inaccurate.
Yeah.
And so, as you said, absolutely, to take what we observe in somebody else as a mirror reflection, not necessarily a perfect one, but
Hmm.
certainly reflecting back to ourselves, saying, I have that inside myself somewhere, maybe buried deep, maybe ignored, maybe undeveloped, but it's in me because I can see it in them. And that's a great gift to give ourselves.
Exactly. Especially if you do tend to be, have that um, mindset where you do, look around and keep thinking somebody else has something that you don't have. But I also
Hmm.
wanted to go back to, again, these obsessive relationships, and whether you've been the victim of an obsession or whether you find yourself being obsessive, to just not have any shame around it. I mean, a lot of the work that we do, or certainly I do and you do too, is around that codependence, is
Yeah.
sort of um, emphasis on another person rather than on yourself. And often that comes from childhood trauma, and that state of limerence that we call that obsessive love is we call it limerence, and often when you're a child and you grow up in an environment where say there's abuse or neglect or whatever, we can often disappear into that fantasy as children and create that sort of cocktail, that neurochemical cocktail of, I think it's like sort of dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and all those things inside us that can actually get us high. It can
Yeah.
actually self-soothe with it. And often as children, you can't go out and sort of drink or buy drugs. So you do this escaping into fantasy as a way to numb out, as a way to feel better. And often the fantasy is of somebody is going to come and save me. Somebody is going to come and make my world better. And that's often where this obsessive, compulsive behavior takes root, is in that childhood.
That's true. There's something very, um, so I don't, it's funny, everyone on camera doesn't fit. Let me reset it. The challenge with this positioning of being unable to take charge ourselves and to be honoring ourselves in the process, because we haven't been raised with a sense of like when we see something somebody else, we can look at ourselves and claim it for ourselves first, as we said earlier. And that um, mindset that becomes like a lack driving us
Mm-hmm.
is where so many people would tend to be stuck. And that's so when they have that fixation on somebody else outside themselves, some, again, celebrity or just neighbor or somebody else in their lives, it can be such a false, like fool's gold in a way. It's that falseness of what you think you're going to get when you get there, which you never do. Rather, when we do take the time, again, re-emphasize the point, when we do take the time to look at ourselves honestly and start claiming for ourselves and build ourselves up as well. Because some of us have come through families where we weren't raised with a lot of self-positive regard. So we've been in a place where we seem to externalize our need on somebody else because we don't feel like we, either one, we deserve it, or two, that we have the not authority, but ownership of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so for some people hearing our talk, maybe the first time they look at themselves in the mirror and go, can I have that? Can I be that? And then it's in a way, because when you do, when I believe, and again, I haven't done a survey of the whole planet to know for sure. However, I do believe when we do value ourselves and take really good inventory of who we are and what we're about and really honor who we are, there's no obsession for anybody else at all.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But and I bring that up so that and that's what I also, just going back to the show for a minute. The interview I watched with Richard Gadd
Hmm.
was he had a lot of compassion for his stalker, and he wanted to. I mean, I'll go into other aspects of the show in a minute, but it wasn't a, the stalker's crazy, she's bad, I was the victim of her. I mean, he owns so much of his own dysfunction in the series. It's incredible. But what he really wanted to highlight was that it she was mentally ill. I mean, she had distorted thinking, and
Hmm.
she was a fantasist, and she lived in this fantasy, and he had compassion for her. And it was his, and he saw straight away that things were a little off. I mean, things weren't lining up. Here she was telling grandiose stories of how successful a lawyer she was and everything, but she couldn't afford a cup of tea in the pub he worked in. So he gave her a cup of tea. And that's where
Right.
it started. his compassion and care for her was what initially attracted her to him, and
Hmm.
vice versa. I mean, he admits he wasn't in a good place in his life, and he enjoyed the attention and the adoration she had for him, which is very seductive for some
Oh
people.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so it's not about who's good or who's bad or anything like that. It's to just have a deeper understanding of both, um, both the, whether we call it the victim and the persecutor in this situation, but to just have compassion for people that have been through trauma or do have this distorted thinking, and to not see them as evil or bad. I mean, yes, they can cause horrible, horrendous havoc in somebody's life, and sometimes even become violent, which is
Yeah,
horrific. So we're not downplaying it, but we're also saying to not sort of judge and label people as just crazy and bad, that there is some deep psychological issue that they're dealing with that would have them abandon themselves in pursuit of another person.
yeah. Because when we do judge and label people that way, there's no desire, there's no possibility, there's no even intention about to reach out to offer support or help. But if
Hmm.
you see somebody is caught up in a psychological dysfunction, then there's a sense of, well, what can I do to help? What can I do to guide? What can I do to facilitate them being better?
Yeah.
Which is a much healthier approach. Ultimately, I mean, that's the big challenge. I mean, just to speak outside this conversation for a moment, we've seen over the last couple of years, especially after the pandemic, the yearning for, but may not be the fulfillment of having real mental support for people out in the streets and out in the world. That is now becoming more talked about, thankfully. It's something we haven't got to yet, but the idea of shifting away from the punitive policing type of methodology to a mental support service, guidance, helpful resource
Hmm.
to help people out of the situations. They're not being repeat quote offenders in this sense. So the same thing true in the obsessive conversation is seeing that person not to enable them or um, to justify what they're doing, but to explain, to understand what they're about, so you can see them through a different lens, and maybe then see, okay, then how can I be able to nudge them in the right direction, maybe, or get someone to help them, or whatever it is. So we're coming from a constructive place rather than a destructive place.
Yeah. And to build on that is to also know that it's not your place to help them, that
Oh yeah,
you
yes, indeed.
are object of somebody's obsession. You are not the person to help them.
Oh,
And
as it gets very complicated.
yeah, exactly. That's when you have to establish really healthy boundaries, really clearer than maybe you would with other people, to the point where you might be going against the grain of how you often show up in the world, but to have very strong, healthy boundaries and to direct that person to getting professional help. And I say that as a coach as well. If, like I said, I've had two examples where I've had clients become obsessive, and I was very clear that I was not the person to help them with this obsession. That
Right.
it was, as George Pransky would say, it was above my pay grade, and to recommend that they seek help somewhere else. And you make it very, very clear, again, as we say, not to get, this compassion from somebody doesn't mean that you self-sacrifice. The compassion means that you close the door very firmly, very kindly, but very firmly, especially with somebody
Yeah.
that is misreading signals and has an obsession about you. But just to absolutely, and to again, to look at what it is, on, as I said earlier with me, I know that, my lack of feeling like I was entitled to say no to people growing up. I mean, no was a dirty word. You just said yes automatically, yes to everything. And I was bad if I said no, or I can't, or I won't. It was, you just didn't have a self. But to look
Right.
at that too and just see how much that thinking can draw in some people that don't have healthy boundaries, that are sort of just focused on themselves and not respectful of your space. So how much of your behavior, not blaming the victim at all here, but how much of your behavior has allowed that door to stay open, as you said, when
Yeah.
the red flags are already there and you're still sort of allowing that to happen? How much of that is yours that you do have control of? Because we don't have control over how somebody else behaves or what they think of us, but we do have a bit more control than we think about our own environment, our own space, our own bodies, our own, and to have those healthy boundaries up.
It's a change, it's a shift. And that's the thing, is that, I mean, I'm sure if we're looking in history books, we'd find different obsessive personalities that created great change in culture, and different people's lives got changed dramatically. And as I said earlier about the mental support, it's like, we know more now. We're smarter now.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to keep falling in the same old traps that we've set up or we've been through before. So how do you want to choose as a functional adult to respond to somebody who is being obsessive? Can you be self-aware enough to realize that it's not about you have to worry about, it's also about how do you connect with somebody else, as you said, not to do it yourself if you're an expert or a leader, but also how to separate yourself in a clean way so that you don't provoke the behavior any worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it comes down to that level. And it is one of these things that's not an easy answer, because there are certain mental dysfunctions, in quotes, that can be very hard to navigate if you don't know your skills. So don't attempt it unless you are trained in that area and it's not you that's the direct target of that person.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And also just to again, that awareness that to not be flattered as well by somebody's, because initially sometimes it doesn't come across as obsessive. They absolutely love you, and they've got you on a pedestal, and that can be a little seductive for some people if you're
Oh yeah,
a little
getting your ego stroked is a nice thing.
Exactly.
Sometimes.
Well, I was saying with the Richard Gere, his character in the series, I think it's Donnie something his name was, but he admitted to his need for validation. He succumbed to her laughing at everything he said. He was a comedian that was sort of not really successful in his career, so he was enjoying this adoration and this attention in the beginning. But to just be aware of that too. Don't get sucked into that flattery that can then become obsessive. But I also want to comment on sort of the culture we live in. I mean, when you said something about going back in history, and I'm thinking, well, Romeo and Juliet, I mean, we've been fed through the arts, through music, through film, through everything, to have these obsessive relationships, to have that sort of, I'll die for you feeling when it comes to love. And if you're not dealing in full reality and you are a little susceptible to being a fantasist or whatever it is, you can get, ordinary love is not good enough for you. You do seek the high of that obsessive, compulsive, I'll die without you type of love. I mean, God, every song that's ever written, I mean, you'll never hear a love song written about sort of kind, respectful love. Yes, lovely. No, it's like, I'll die for you,
Well, yeah, I mean, even the simplistic love we talked about way back at the beginning of our series about, in Jerry Maguire, you complete me, that mindset, that the other person is the missing piece for your life, is the beginnings of an obsession. It is the beginnings of that focus of not being able to function on your own 2 feet. You have to get somebody else to make your life whole. Mm-hmm. And it's a trap. It doesn't work. And it can be extremely toxic. So this episode may be listed as a cautionary tale.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Well, we're coming to the end of it, but just, and nobody's blaming the victim. Nobody's blaming anyone. It's a dynamic that is, as we say, fed by our culture. And, most of us, thank goodness, realize that in the end, obsessive love is not the type of love we want to experience. But to just, to also, if you are the person that is the object of somebody's obsession, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. If that means getting a restraining order, please do it. Don't wait. I mean, that's the other thing I want to say here. This is not to sort of diminish the harm that an obsessive stalker can have by any means. So, any last points, Barry?
I think we covered it. It's quite a juicy episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week. Have a great week.
See you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
We trust you enjoyed this episode and invite you to share this with your friends and loved ones. In fact, please subscribe to our Relationship Mastery podcast. That way you'll get each new episode fresh and shiny as soon as it is released. We'd love to hear from you as well.
So go ahead and enter your questions and comments at relationshipmastery.show. Take good care. We will connect with you in our next episode of Relationship Mastery.